It's amazing advice. Yeah.
You guys are awesome. Thank you.
You're awesome.
Stop it!
I gotta go think about that now.
We're all set.
We're all set?
Yep.
What did you want to know about exactly? Not the oblivious.
Well, it was
part.
the vocabulary for
vocabulary.
discussing.
Yeah.
Issues of privilege, race privilege specifically?
Yeah, or white privilege. Or just race.
Or race, yeah.
I mean, I would say I certainly find other white people incredibly resistant when I bring it up. And they're the same white people who feel like they don't have a problem with race. You know what I mean? Like, and that is always a little shocking to me that, like,
Well, they don't have a problem with it.
Well, right. right.
They're not coming up
people.
against, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or, yes, I guess I should say they don't understand that they're
Implicated.
that they're in a position of privilege, and that's why their lives roll out in a certain way.
Right.
And give me an example of a conversation.
Of a conversation. So there's a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, who makes experimental theater, and he does a podcast, this long-form podcast where he talks to experimental theater artists for 2 hours. Like, it's a pretty interesting series of podcasts if you want to geek out on theater. It's people from all over the world. So I was in the room with him talking, and he was talking about how he really just thought it was fine that anyone who sort of needed to come to his work would come to his work. But his work, for me, I know his work well, and for me it exists in this very culturally specific idiom. The subject matter is white suburban upbringing without making reference to the fact that it's about being a white suburban person in their 30s, you know. And so I was like, well, that's a bit of I said, for me, that's not interesting. And he was saying, why should I have to, it was something about, like, why should I have to explain what I'm doing in cultural terms? Anyone can come see it. Anyone is equally free to access the work. And I was like, that's from a position of privilege. Like, not everybody sees themselves in your work. And so if you know, it depends on whether you want a more diverse audience or not, or want to engage a conversation with a broader public or series of publics. But it's not a given that anyone who might have an identification with your work is going to see it. I mean, I just found it very awkward. But when I said I'm not quite doing the conversation justice, but when I said that's a position of privilege, he really moved us on to the next topic, you know. And that was like, and I tried to keep us there a little bit, but I didn't succeed in being articulate, nor did he want to go there, you know. And I thought I was like, oh, I thought this was kind of juicy, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I personally like the discomfort of the conversation. I feel like it's really important. That's how I live my life. It's sort of uncomfortable, so I'm surprised when people want to stay comfortable, you know. I'm constantly waiting 13 seconds.
I'm just learning how to talk about race myself from my own experience. I think I definitely do like to live in a place of just like no conflict. I'm very conflict averse, very conflict averse. And not that that's good, I'm just saying. that's what happens. But so I've been more doing more activism. I'm with a group called the Asian American Performers Action Coalition, and we're rah-rahing about the underrepresentation of Asians in theater in New York. And I got into that, and that started like in the late 11, and I sort of was just like, I want to be a part of this, but I'll just do tasks. And now it's gotten to the point where I'm having my own one-on-one meetings with the executive director of the Directors Union and being like, these are our issues, and blah, blah, and feeling really grown up about it and more confident in how I can articulate just what our experience has been and is. But it's been so, if I could have just kept my head in the sand forever, I would have it. I just feel like I can't anymore. You know what I mean? Just with glass ceiling, I just feel it, you know, or whatever it is. And I feel it's nice to be able to articulate better how I feel and how my community, for lack of a better phrase, right now feels. So there's that. I'm just coming to terms with that out of a need. So I can only imagine, and if I want to keep my head in the sand, I can only imagine if the majority or the white people who don't have a problem with it can just forever more just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, I can just imagine, or not have a vocabulary, because I'm just finding my vocabulary.
question again is deriving a vocabulary for talking about race
Or just
white privilege? Or what is
how have we come up against in our own experience, like the oblivious white people having a lack of vocabulary when talking about something about that. That's what Bristol was saying he was interested in.
And both. I think that and culturally, talking about and addressing it changing. I think,
In America,
yeah.
or like,
I don't know if I talk about it changing. We just kind of make fun of it. So
Mm.
it's kind of like, you know, especially among, you know, my other friends who are African American and colleagues, you know, we're always constantly just making kind of the race card sarcastic remarks. Well, you know, that happened because, you know, you rubbed your hand, you know. Or, but it's interesting, we have interns of different ethnicities, and I just kind of wonder too, you know, when they're like, we will be candid talking about, and also too, we're doing a film on Mississippi, so that's race right there.
Right.
So it's kind of like, oh, well, you know, the blacks Mississippi and the whites, you know, the whites are all racist in Mississippi, and then in between there, we'll kind of, I think we can be kind of loose at the tongue sometimes, but I wonder what their perspective is, and I wonder too,
whose perspective?
just
The younger people?
the younger people, because they're not really in that. It meets like myself and my other colleagues, like producers who are talking to us, but the interns aren't really engaged in that conversation. I don't know. It's because maybe they don't really feel comfortable about it, or you know, maybe because we're not inviting them in it. But it's more so kind of in passing. But I'm always curious to wonder if in their circles, if they're as open about race as we are. You know, making, and you know, like I said, I think it's true. Everyone has a degree of racism because you know everyone puts each other in certain categories. So I'm very curious about what their conversation is, and if
I don't subscribe to that notion that everybody is racist. I'm one who believes that racism has to do with power, and that I can be bigoted. Certainly, I can be prejudiced. You know, can and am. You know, and as a work in progress, and
which we all are,
aspiring towards, you know, my most powerful humanity, I attempt to be self-aware, such that as I am operating out of some prejudice or other, you know, I can check myself. You know, take some deep breaths and step back, and you know what I mean, and do battle with that impulse. But I don't think everybody's racist. I just, I don't, you know, I think racism has to do with privilege.
Right.
You know, racism involves a power dynamic.
Right.
You know, and yeah. So I was kind of frustrated that Russell, in setting us up, acknowledged what he perceives as his racism.
I was wondering about
Owning
that too, a
that.
little bit.
Because, you know, for me, that sort of lets people off the hook. You know, and inviting everybody to, you know, well, acknowledge,
Right.
you know. And to the extent that Russell has invited everybody, you know, I trust that folks are progressive
Yeah.
Sure.
and anti-racist aspirational.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
we get T-shirts.
whether you know, right?
Racist slash
No
former
racism.
recovering racist
You know.
or accidental racist. What is that country called?
But I wonder, had he not given us that,
Yeah.
you know, that, what do you call it? That latitude,
That we're all in it together.
that little present.
Yeah.
I'm racist.
Right.
You know, if everybody, you know, or if every white body
Right.
would have owned racism.
Right.
Though I think maybe there was a little bit of intentional disarming.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I think that what you said is so important, and that's part of the vocabulary culturally we're missing, which is the difference between prejudice, which of course everybody is prejudiced.
Everybody's
Right.
prejudiced.
You-
Yes.
You can't function as a being without some degree of prejudice. Because if you're constantly without prejudice, it means you're analyzing every situation from scratch, and you can't do that. It's like if I eat this food, I'm not going to die. If I eat that one, I am. If this happens, that's going to happen. If that's not. So prejudice has a function. I mean, I think we evolved into a level of that. And then it's got negative sides to it, which is that we take on cultural things as true as this food is poisonous, this one is not. Racism is something so different, which is it's about its structures of power. It's about it's historical, it's economic, it's political. It's got all these underpinnings. It's
And if you don't carry that power, you can't be racist.
yeah, I mean, and that's the things that we talk about. If you look at, it still hasn't changed. Twice as much money for white students as black students. If you look at all the sentencing on all the actual structural things that haven't actually really gotten that much better even in the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, haven't actually changed. That's racism. And that's, I think, when we talk about vocabulary, that's one of the things we're missing. Is that.
Right.
Is that prejudice is something very different. And we all have prejudices. Some of them happen to coincide with structures of power. And then they become something really different. Because they're backed up by the police. They're backed up by
Or some of them
Right.
happen to be undergirded, supported, buttressed.
Yeah.
Informed
Yeah.
Right.
by power.
Right.
Right.
So I think what you said is so.
Yeah, I do hate that the phrase reverse racism is a thing.
I know.
I hate it.
Or the race
hate it.
card.
Or
I think the race card is
Right.
one of the latest devices racists use to deflect their racism, their active racism.
By calling it out, you were playing. There's
By-
a race
by-
card. It gets you in the country club. There's a race card.
Yeah,
Gets you in the
exactly.
boardroom.
Exactly.
So,
What was part 2 of the question?
Is it shifted by being in
Or is
an
it different by being in
urban area, in a metropolitan area, in a
I
diverse?
imagine so. I imagine it's different. I don't know if it's better. I just.
That's
I mean, how many people grew up in New York? I guess
That's
the
the thing. I
question.
did.
I did.
I
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. Where did you grow up?
Suburbs outside of Baltimore.
Okay.
Okay.
Minneapolis.
Okay.
Sugar Heights. So.
What's that?
Sugar
Sugar Heights?
Heights.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
You grew up in Shaker Heights?
Yep. Russell and I went to high school together.
Okay. Yeah.
So I just think it's kind of interesting from, the suburbs of America versus like the city.
Well, I mean, I grew up in white suburbs.
The
Really
best
white.
place.
But it was, and with a lot of racism, just assumed. My
Sure.
family, I grew up in a Unitarian church, so it was kind of progressive bastion against that. But, people said nigger in every grade level I was in. It was just, probably from over 6th grade. That was assumed. It was ugliness but for me it was that. I would say it was a progressive community around the Unitarian Church, and then I became a Marxist, and there was a training and a political tradition that is part of what the vocabulary, and that's missing in this country, which is that rooted radical tradition that starts to examine these things, and it's such a minority experience in this country.
Well, the N word is still very popular now. The nigger word.
Yeah, I know.
It's sort of endearment, but yes, but it's interesting. Even
Well, but I'm talking but I'm saying
Yes,
from
yeah,
white people
right,
using
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
talking about people who did not live there.
Yeah.
In my household, I don't know. It was just never. The only time it wasn't even. The only time you talk about it is talking about people talking about it. If there was ever in church, that was it. It was not. We didn't curse, but that was on a whole
This
other
nigga in
level.
quotation marks.
Yes.
Yeah. Goodness.
I wonder, Aaron, as you talked about your efforts to take up the conversation with other white people who experience discomfort around it, bristle or resist or dismiss, deflect. where that leaves you in relationship to not just to them and to their discomfort, but your own relationship to race
Yeah.
and racism.
It's a great question. Do you mean in terms of like either my perceived obligations to the conversation, or on another level, or both?
That's a good place to start.
Okay.
certainly. Yeah.
Because I feel like I come from a pretty exceptional white family in terms of this issue, right? So my dad was Jewish, my mom's Christian. When they got married, my dad's dad, who was
It's a mixed marriage.
a mixed marriage,
Yeah.
and in 1962, my dad's dad offered him a car instead of marrying my mom, and and he
Your
couldn't afford.
dad's
My dad's
Wow.
dad
Dad
offered my
offered him a
dad.
car.
He said, "I'll buy you a convertible if you don't marry that chick." And they didn't have the money for a convertible, A, and B. And then my mom's dad, was like, "You're not marrying that kike," and so. At the same time, my dad was attending the I Have a Dream speech, my mom was marching for Selma Montgomery, and they were like, oh, ding, like, there's, all of this is ridiculous, or all of this is worth fighting against. So, what I'm struck by in a conversation like the one I brought up is how slow-moving my own process is. So I've had like 44 years of training, right? Like, my parents were inculcating me into issues of race and privilege, and they still work on these issues. And I still kind of fuck it up a lot. You know what I mean? Like,
How?
I should have pushed that conversation. You know what I mean? It's a podcast. 300 people are going to listen to it. I knew the answer, right? I knew that, and I thought of just the right things to say, like we all do afterward.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be like, oh, woe is me, but what I'm struck by is the power of the institutional forces, and as an artist, like even as they affect the aesthetics, and that's where I feel like. That's where the work is for me. Like, either working at having the conversation with other artists, especially white artists, or white institutions, because I look at how African American artists are expected to make one or two kinds of work to fit into a white-run institution in theater, right? If you want to have the black slot at your theater workshop, it's got to be identity-based work with some reference to hip-hop dialect in it, or history, right? From 1930 to 1970. If it's after 1970, we get a little nervous, because that's something else, right?
What if it's before 1930?
Well, then maybe we want to go there, but very briefly. Maybe, I don't know, it's a good question. And so I feel like that's where I would like to have more conversations, because I'm struck by how slow-moving that is. If you know Daniel Alexander Jones, he has a character, Jemima Jones, that I think is just genius. He made a show at Soho Rep, and it's like, it deals with race and queerness and maleness in a pretty, I think a pretty multi-dimensional way, and it's very hard for him to get a gig in New York. And he got a glowing Times review and sold out a run at Soho Rep. And he's got plenty of new material, and he can do like one night at Joe's Pub here and there. And for me, that's the institutional part of it as it affects the arts world. And I do feel, honestly, like that's where I feel my obligation is, because I'm in that world a little bit. Like I work at well-meaning white institutions with my work, and work with other white artists a lot, and that's where I want to kind of keep working that bone. Sorry, I went on a long time. Sorry.
Oh,
But
No, that's very
not
interesting.
so much to be sorry, but a happening space to be occupying, sounds like. So you're not racist.
no, I would say, of course I am. I mean, I benefit from the power structure. I would say I've done a lot of work on it. But I don't know that you can escape. Oh, I guess
How
the
do you
question,
become unracist?
right.
I guess is a fairer, more.
Yeah.
Adopt a black child from Africa.
You know you wrong.
I'm just saying.
I'm not mad at you.
Huh.
Well, that is a question. Does being anti-racist make
Make
one
you not a racist.
not racist? Does one have
Right.
to overthrow structural roots of racism?
And racism is
well,
learned.
I mean, one does have to, but I mean that's it's an interesting question.
But I think a lot of it is learned behavior. I mean,
Right.
it is learned. You're told. Well, your parents were told, and they were told, and they
Right.
were told. So it's.
Oscar Hammerstein said it best.
What is it?
You must be carefully taught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You must
Yeah.
be taught to hate and fear. It must be drummed in your dear little ear. before to hate all the people your relatives hate before you are 6 or 7 or 8. You must be carefully taught. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is learned.
Yeah.
You know, behavior. I mean, people have done studies. Put babies
Right.
together, ethnic babies,
Right.
in a playpen, you know, or in a sandbox, and watch what happens.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know, you know, the white baby will get up and say, "Little nigger, kite, get your ass up."
Well, the words are powerful things.
Mhm.
I mean, I gotta say, even when we were talking about, like, when I use the N word, which even in quotes, I started to
hot.
flush.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
like, it just, because for me, it could never be that object of affection. Which is,
Imagine my surprise.
yeah. And that's because we were talking about race. It was like, okay, I'm not gonna be, this is what I heard growing up.
Yeah.
And it made me sick when I heard it.
Yeah.
And that's why there's another generation of younger white hip hop fans who have adopted, and I don't, but I may not be in a position to say, but I'm always like, that just doesn't work for me, because every time I heard that, I was kind of non-confrontational, but I had to get in the version of getting in a fight and saying that's the ugliest word you can say, because that's all I heard growing up was that. And so for me, and then going into political organizing, and that's the word that's associated with lynching. I've got to say this. That's a physically uncomfortable word for me still, and I can't judge how it's used in other communities, but I must admit, in my heart of hearts, I wish it would be one we would retire. Because I'm coming from hearing it from the people who use it
In its original
to
intended purpose.
brutalize with, and it makes me, yeah.
It's always been a word of, brutality. It's always been a word.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
But then just black. But also too, there's like the Asian. It's like it's so black white, but then there's the other side of it.
Yeah,
So I
right.
think.
what's the other
Well, the
side?
other side, I think, because we can get so, at least I find the black and white, like
Yeah.
black people, black skin and white is such a conversation that people of, Asian descent, or whether it's, Asia like in India or Asia like China, I feel like that conversation kind of gets lost. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Personally, just from from what I've observed, I feel
well,
like it gets
I
lost.
feel like the African American experience is there's more it's longer back. That's what it feels like. I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, in America.
In America.
Yeah.
In America is what I mean.
Yeah.
So we're kind of catching up. We're kind of like, oh yeah, we're really mad too. You know what I mean? And every time, and that's what we talk about in APAC. That thing. It's like, okay, everybody, all you well-meaning theater institutions that are into diversity. Let's not just make diversity mean a black-white issue anymore.
Right.
We're invisible too,
Right.
or more now.
Well, and there's
or
also there's
whatever.
diversity. I mean, but there is something which is structurally, America is built on racism against black people, right? I mean, slavery created the wealth of America, and it's why when you look at every other immigrant group, there's a different kind of economic shift that takes place that has still not been, the 40-acre and a mule promise has never been fulfilled, and it's so there is a difference. It doesn't mean we can ignore, but there is a fundamental difference, which is that assimilation has never actually been.
It's never for African Americans.
For African
For every other group,
Right.
including
Right.
Asians
Yes.
and South Asians.
Yep.
Yeah.
In a
They
generation.
came to come to school.
In a generation,
Or get better.
can
or
become
get a
assimilated.
better job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can and have.
Exactly.
Where
Exactly.
and there is a link to that want of or absence of or denial of the ability to assimilate and nigger or many African Americans embrace of the construct of nigger, which for me is a gaping psychic wound. But what's that got to do with white privilege? Um, hmm. and our relating to each other more healthfully, or
Yeah.
our I don't know. It's Stacy. You may have said something to the effect. I don't know. For me, you cannot but be racist. As a white person. Forget in America, in the world. At this moment in the history, of the world. To the extent that, the Brits for the last several hundred years, and now the last century and a half or so, the Americans, who were Brits, have been the dominant culture. You cannot but be racist, but for conscientious unto religious investment in unlearning white supremacy. You cannot.
Right.
Yeah, you can't, because that's what we all are taught.
Right.
We cannot not be self-hating. But for some serious investment in unlearning the same stuff that white people have to unlearn, unlearning the myth of white supremacy. That's why so many of us run around doing all the things that we do that might otherwise seem contraindicated.
I think the other side of that is we need to tear down the bricks and the structures that are underpinning it. And that's when you say, what does it have to do with it? That's
all the systems.
That's
all the systems. Name a system.
It's
Yeah.
within all the
system.
systems, and it's built into the systems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Name any system.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
That
Education.
Health,
Education, health.
environment, military,
Politics.
Banking.
Right.
yeah,
Banking.
criminal justice.
Bing,
obviously.
bing, bing, bing,
Yeah,
bing.
Yeah.
every.
Every system.
Yeah.
Well, because this country was founded on white supremacy.
Right.
And
unacknowledged.
and genocide.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I was going to ask.
yeah.
Which is,
The original people were.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm constantly fascinated watching the news, even so-called progressive, programming like the MSNBC fare. Any place but like Link TV or Free Speech TV. This talk of terrorists. Y'all are the original terrorists,
That's right.
Right.
and the most bestesses, the most prolific and potent, even yet. Which is talking about post-racial society, with Barack Obama, as the first African American president. Well, he really truly is an African American, isn't
Yes,
he?
exactly.
In the
Technically,
truest
literally.
sense.
Yes.
But his American, is white.
Yeah.
And when I think about his foreign policy, I love Barack, don't get me wrong.
Right.
I'm rooting for him to get better.
Yeah.
To grow and become,
Right.
more
Right.
humanist.
Right.
But his foreign policy scares the shit out of me, the living daylights out of me. Because it's like
It's a
the
democratic.
old terrorist shit
Yeah.
that white people have perpetrated inexorably
Right.
in the history of this country.
Yeah.
You're killing people,
Right.
the world over. And that's not good.
Mhm.
It just isn't. You know, I mean, I don't know what justifications
Right.
are for this one, that one, the other one, and collateral damage of those items on the kill lists. But anywho, yeah, I'm endlessly fascinated by the way language is used to frame our experience. Language is turned on its ear, or like reverse racism.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, like race card.
Yep.
You know, terrorist.
Right.
I mean, the only kind of reverse racism is anti-racism, right? Because you're trying to reverse
Exactly.
racism.
Very true.
Exactly.
Good one.
Yeah.
Good one. Good
Yeah.
one.
So we're gonna bring this to a close. I think it's a good point to do that. It's been really insightful, really great. Sorry, I wanted to partake.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say you
right.
didn't say anything.
No, seriously.
I know that's not because he has no opinions.
That's right. That's right.
That's because he's mixed. That's why he's confused.
Yeah.
So y'all having all the fun in here.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
We're ready to go all night.
Well, I'm ready to evict you from this room.
All right.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Going out of better places.
I feel like we've bonded. I feel like we've bonded, you guys.
Yeah.